Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sprint 198 review. It was a normal 2-week sprint, and let's get started. I'll start with the overview, Jeffrey on the UI, Adam on providers, and Joe on the platform. As you can see, for Sprint 198 is very similar to the previous sprint with 111 PRs merged this sprint. The closed PRs by label has a pretty big spread. There was a number of blast out changes to all of the repos. And a number of those PRs were also closed. That's why this number is a lot higher than the one on the previous slide. And over to Jeffrey. Oops.
Hey, so good morning. In the sprint, 14 PRs got merged into the UI Classic repo, out of which 5 are bugs, 4 are enhancements, and few others. I can explain about them in the following slides. There was an error displayed when trying to delete the saved reports. Melody had added checks on variables before this action to fix this issue. Next slide. When the dashboard charts are expanded to full screen, the legend items were hidden in Firefox. By modifying the style sheets, the legends are now visible. Next slide. The server placement group option was added. Cloud instance by providers summary in the cloud instance provider summary page by Kuldeep. Next slide. In the compute cloud instance comparison page, when you hit the apply button without making any change, the default items was not selected before. This issue got fixed by finding and initializing the default items to the session. Next slide. The tabs under the catalog summary requesting for tabs, like the catalog, environment, properties, customize, schedules, were all converted from the HTML to React by reusing the MIQ custom tab components. Next slide. When the server placement group was added, the VM textual summary method for placement group was broken. JCommon fixed this by renaming one of the variables in the textual summary helper to fix this problem. Next slide. Some providers were supporting saving SSH keys. So while provisioning a VM, we were needed to allow the user to post an SSH public key. For this, Adam added a keyword called SSH public key to certain provision view files to perform some checkings. Next slide. Melody converted the timeline forms from Angular to React. Next slide. And for the others, Joe removed Coffee Rails from engine and gemspec files to be backported to the Morphe branch. And Melody upgraded the D3 package from 7.0 to 7.6.1. And Brandon upgraded workflow from actions checkout version 2 to version 3. That's all from my side. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Jeffrey. For Amazon this sprint, we updated the list of instance types to add the new TRN1 types. So they'll be available for provisioning in the next build. For Azure, we made some changes to collect the filtered images by default. These are things like RHEL 7, RHEL 8, Windows Server. They were an option. You could change the advanced settings to collect them, but it was defaulted to off. If you don't filter the list of market images, there's over 30,000 of them, and so that's not really feasible. But by default, we come with a set of URNs that we will only collect for, and so it made sense to turn this on by default because it only brings in about 11 images, and it increases the usability for the customer because typically you'd want to provide one of those standard operating system images anyway. So we'll now collect those by default without having to change the advanced settings. We also added some of the updated image URIs. The last time it was updated was a few years ago, so there was only the original RHEL 7, Windows Server 2016, and so we added the newer versions as well as adding Ubuntu options, 16.04 and 22.04. We handle some permissions errors if you're fetching stack templates. We're having issues where there's a deny option that could be applied to stack templates. And so when fetching them, it would cause the whole refresh to fail. So now we're just skipping any stacks that we don't have permission to see the underlying template for. And we also did some refactoring to fix the network ports memoization and remove some unused helper methods. The targeted refresh code for network ports was complicated, and so we cleaned that up quite a bit. We were able to delete a bunch of unused methods after that. Next slide. For IBM Cloud, Jay removed placement groups from advanced settings for Power VS VMs. These are now a proper model and relation, and so they don't need to be stored in advanced settings anymore. They also removed the placement group string field from the provision dialogues because it's going to be a dropdown now. Before we were collecting placement groups, you had to type in the name of the placement group manually, and now it'll be a dropdown, so it'll be a lot easier. We also renamed the VPC provision dialog to follow the standard pattern. When you went to provision a VPC VM, it was looking for a dialog YAML that didn't exist, and it was failing. So if we renamed the dialog to match what it's looking for by default, so we weren't relying on the override to tell provisioning what to load. For Power HMC, the Power team added the ability to set the description for VMs. They added display names for hosts and VMs that match the HMC terminology. So if you're on the page for a particular host or VM, it looks like what you'd see on the HMC dashboard. They also added the ability to rename VMs. They added a new API to the HMC gem to be able to do this, to be able to change the names of the VMs and to change the description. They're now collecting host hardware devices, so you can see all of the hardware that your HMC hosts have. They're also improved the refresh of hosts to fetch the status first before getting the rest of the information, because if a host is disconnected, the API call to get the full details of that host takes a long time and hits the timeout. So right now they do a quick API that gets a list of all the hosts and their statuses first, and then they go through that list and only fetch full details of the host if it's connected. They're also collecting physical IO adapters for VMs, which allows them to then map the LPAR disks for VMs over to the underlying storage using collected vSCSI mappings, which is in that next one. Next slide. Oh, guess I duplicated that. Sorry. For Power VC, they added placement group support from OpenStack. So the underlying OpenStack provider is collecting placement groups, and Power VC is opted into collecting those as well. Next slide. For OpenStack, they're refreshing placement groups, which OpenStack calls server groups. And so this will be able to be used by the rest of the OpenStack child providers. So Power VC and IBM CIC will pull this in as well. And for Oracle Cloud, we are now supporting provisioning instances from images. Next slide. And for the VMware SDK, this sprint we added support for vSphere 8.0. And we also fixed issues with CI on Windows running with previously the latest bundler version. They've since released a fix in a 2.3 to 24 to resolve this issue. So we're using that. And that is it for providers. Over to Joe.
Okay, for core enhancements, Keenan added the zone instance method maintenance question mark, and that was hiding some implementation details that we were exposing previously. Next, Jay normalized the placement group product feature to be consistent and added migration to change the existing databases. Adam added a ManageIQ prefix to the existing topic for the Kafka liveness check to avoid conflicts and clarify that ManageIQ manages it. Adam also enhanced the appliance console to only stop and start EVM server D after configuring both the database and messaging instead of around each one of them. Jason updated the Ansible VENV RPM build to no longer limit it to x86 64 architecture to use Python 3.8, and he made some other changes there too. Keenan added a helper method for the common pattern where we call the pair of methods MQQ deliver and delivered. This occurs frequently in tests. I added the October 13th English translations generated from the master branch at that time. Adam already mentioned that Jay removed the placement group from advanced settings. Next, Adam refactored the code in appliance console that was starting, stopping, restarting, and checking the status of the EVM server systemd service. I added a development enhancement to raise a pending migration error on an API or UI page load to help remind developers when they need to migrate their database. Next slide, please. For core bugs, Adam fixed the bug introduced from the non-Rails worker changes from last sprint, where worker subclasses were not inheriting an instant variable intended to be shared. Jason removed the Ansible standard out callback environment variable, which is not honored and not needed with Ansible runner. Next, Adam fixed the Ruby 3 bug in the call automate event where the keyword arguments were previously implicitly passed or delegated, but now they have to be explicit because Ruby 3 is very opinionated in that area. I fixed the bug where the backend code allowed the user to delete a widget that was currently in use in a user dashboard. This would cause the dashboards to be orphaned with references to widgets that aren't there anymore. Now you actually have to remove the widgets from existing dashboards before you can remove them. Adam fixed a bug that occurred in appliance console after configuring messaging, where it would print the press any key to continue twice. Not really a bug, but Brandon updated the codified code dependencies and other changes for the operator SDK 1.24.0. Next slide.
All right. And that's it for our Sprint 198 review. Our Sprint 199 review will be on November 2nd at the usual place and time. And as always, I'd like to thank all of the contributors to ManageIQ, all the presenters today, and our community. See you later.